Okay, Administrator, thank you for your time. First, explain to us what this does in practice for automobile makers and what it means for Americans.
Sure. The Supreme Court decision in Loper Bright and West Virginia versus EPA, other recent cases made it very clear. Two things. One is I have to follow the best reading of the law. And two is that when there's a big decision that ends up with trillions of dollars of regulations, that's a decision that Congress needs to be participating in. That's called the Major Policies Doctrine. So when I was going through my confirmation process, I said I was going to follow the law. In this case, we want to follow the best reading of the Clean Air Act. And following the best reading of the Clean Air Act, all the mental leaps of the 2009 Obama endangerment finding are inappropriate. They're not authorized in statute. What happened in 2009 was all sorts of different mental leaps were taken in order to claim an authority that the Clean Air Act doesn't provide, and then use that for trillions of dollars of regulation. And we're resetting the regulation to what the Clean Air Act specifically states. And if Congress wants to change the Clean Air Act, then we'll follow what they change it to.
But in practice, can you talk about the additional emissions now that are going to fill the air that we're breathing?
No, I would reject that premise altogether. These vehicles, light, medium, heavy-duty vehicles, have come so far over the course of the last couple decades. All different kinds of engines and vehicles. A lot of people like to focus on electric vehicles, but gas-powered vehicles have come a long way. School buses have come a long way. SUVs and hybrids and all these engines have advanced so much over the course of the last couple of decades, and it's not like you get rid of the endangerment finding and all the greenhouse gas emissions that followed, and then all of a sudden the engine goes back to what it was 20 years ago. But there's all different kinds of compliance and monitoring that's required when you go back to rules on model year 2012 and then the model years that followed. Going forward, we need to follow the law. We are able to make a decision that results in the largest act of deregulation in the history of the United States. We're able to help make vehicles more affordable. The estimate is over $2,400 per new vehicle. So the impact for the American public is significant. That's a lot of money.
So are you offering complete assurance to Americans that removing this endangerment finding is not going to be detrimental to public health or the environment?
Correct. But first off, it's important to note that regardless of my opinion of that,
not opinion, but based on the data, based on the science.
Regardless of my opinion, regardless of yours, regardless of facts, I have to follow the law. And that wasn't followed for a long time by the Obama and Biden administrations. And I'm not going to get creative in trying to hoard imaginary new powers that the Clean Air Act doesn't provide. As it relates to science, here's one of the great things about us having this conversation in 2026. Is that we don't have to rely on bad assumptions that were made in 2009 of where we would actually be in 2026. Now we can rely on present day facts. And what was done in 2009 was that they didn't analyze each of these individual greenhouse gas emissions individually. And they didn't just study and utilize greenhouse gas emissions from vehicles. They added additional greenhouse gases on top of it, even if they weren't emitted from vehicles and trucks, despite the fact that this was a decision that was being made regarding vehicles. They take all of these greenhouse gases, they don't study them individually, and then they say that it contributes, they don't say causes, it contributes to global climate change. That's not in the Clean Air Act. And how much does it contribute, one might ask? Well, they didn't say. We just know it's somewhere north of zero. And then they'll say that the global climate change endangers public health and welfare, but for many decades, that's not how the Clean Air Act was ever interpreted or applied. And get this, on top of it all, at the same time as this endangerment finding being finalized, President Obama and his allies in Congress were trying to get this into law. There was legislation to give them the power, and they couldn't get the votes. So what did they decide to do? Like, well, we'll just make it up. we're not going to come into office in January of 2025 after the election to happen in November of 2024 and just continue to make it up, especially after the Supreme Court decisions like Loper Bright. And again, we don't want to force, as we mentioned inside, manufacturers to build electric vehicles that won't get bought, that the market is not demanding. We aren't going to be giving out these climate participation trophies to manufacturers for putting start-stop features in vehicles that so many Americans despise and they don't want to have inside of their car. It's about listening to the American people and fighting for consumer choice and freedom and affordability. This is what the American public voted for.
In the Roosevelt room with the president, you said you cut the red tape. And I wonder how you view your role as EPA administrator. Is it to cut red tape to benefit the president's economic plan, or is it to protect the environment?
Our core mission is protecting human health and the environment. The first pillar of powering the great American comeback at EPA is to pursue clean air, land, and water for all Americans. What the American public voted for in November of 2024 is that they would want an agency like EPA to both protect the environment and grow the economy. If you're asking me what announcement am I most proud of since becoming administrator of EPA, it was on the 1-year mark of President Trump's term in office. We released a list of 500 environmental actions that we took over the course of that first year. Stuff that was a really big deal. Last Wednesday I was in Los Angeles where we were continuing our work going beyond what EPA traditionally does to help break through local log jams and help with the Los Angeles rebuild. EPA led the effort in less than 30 days in completing a historic hazardous material removal. EPA led the effort in Southern California where we ended up reaching a new agreement with Mexico to combat raw sewage that's coming across the southern border. What we won't do is say that protecting the environment and growing the economy is a binary choice and that we have to choose one or the other. We know that we can choose both, and we know that the American public demands it.
But I'm sorry, to go back to today's action, how does that protect the environment?
Well, first off, I have to follow the law.
So
no
you're saying
what.
regardless of the science, regardless of the, hurting the environment, you have to do this on a technicality?
First off, I would reject emphatically the notion that it harms the environment. But again, regardless of opinion or fact, I have to follow the law, and the Clean Air Act does not authorize the action that was taken. I also, as I mentioned earlier, know that manufacturers are not looking to just make believe like all of their amazing advancements in the way that they've developed all different kinds of engines are just going to get reversed in time a couple of decades. We're continuing to move forward. But what we don't need is $1.3 trillion of added regulatory costs. I'm
pointing to studies that have been done that I'm sure that you have seen.
And they've never studied the impact of carbon dioxide emission when they were doing the 2009 endangerment finding or since. As a matter of fact, after the 2009 endangerment finding, they never had a public comment period. We're having a conversation emitting a lot of carbon dioxide at each other. Should I go back to my building right now and start regulating media questions or my answers? The reality of the moment is, if you want to talk science and studies, one is we're not going to rely on pessimistic, bad assumptions that were made in 2009 that have proven to be inaccurate. We're going to rely always on present day facts. We're going to follow the law, and we know confidently that we can do both, protect the environment and grow the economy.
And what are those present day facts? I mean, if the research you just
Sure,
said hasn't been done and
the Earth has not warmed. We're having this conversation in February 2026. The predictions of where we would be right now in this moment on global warming and sea level rise today is not where the predictions were in 2009. What they did in 2009 was use the most pessimistic assumptions and guesses. They had a choice. I want to know what the weather's going to be in DC 7 days from now. I turn on the forecast. I don't want to know that it's going to be anywhere from 38 degrees and 54 degrees. The person in Washington, DC wants that meteorologist to be spot on and tell us exactly what it's going to be. There's a hurricane coming in 5 or 6 days, and we're living on the coast of Florida or North Carolina. We want to know precisely that track. We want to know its speed. We want to know exactly where it's going to hit. We want to know when it's going to hit. But now what we have is predictions that show us, well, you know what, actually it could go left, it could go right. We have simulations where it might come right over your house, and we're being honest and transparent. But what happened in 2009 when they were trying to give themselves this power, one is they refused to analyze individually each of these well-mixed gases. They then added well-mixed gases that aren't even emitted from vehicles. They used all of them collectively. They then said that that contributes to global climate change, which isn't even in the Clean Air Act. And they're making all of these different mental leaps to try to give themselves a power that they used to then start doing trillions of dollars of regulations on mobile sources, on stationary sources, on oil and gas and airplanes. They used it to give themselves a power because they couldn't get Congress to pass the amendments to the Clean Air Act. That's the fact, and that's the rule of law. And then when you want to study the science and you want to look at where we are today, one is we're not going back in time 20 years on the technology that is being used on our engines. We aren't going to rely on bad assumptions that proved to not be true with pessimistic guesses that were made in 2009. We can rely on present day facts. So all of these things, it's not just that all of these things that I just said could be true. Every single thing I just stated is a fact. And by the way, if there was a single thing that I just stated regarding the law or the science, I would ask you, tell me, what is one thing that I just said that was inaccurate? And I don't mean to put you on the spot. I wouldn't mean to put anyone on the spot. And there's a lot of reporters that are here, but we're just dealing in facts, and we're doing that proudly. The thing is, we don't have to spin what the Clean Air Act says. Everyone can go out and they read it for themselves. And fortunately, we're at a position today where the people spoke. The Trump mandate was put into place. We came in office. I made this commitment to the American public. This was a day one executive order. We've done the research. We've done the work. We did the vetting, and we're very proud of the decision that we made today.
During your confirmation hearings, you said that you do believe in climate change. The president has said the climate change is a hoax. How do you work with him to make policies when there's so much difference?
I work with the president great.
But how does that impact
I'll tell you exactly where it's a massive issue is when we came into office, we realized that there was over $60 billion obligated and spent in 2024, an agency with an operating budget of $10 billion. The agency was putting out more money than they even knew how to spend. They were giving out money through pass-through entities filled with former Obama and Biden officials and Democratic donors. There was examples of environmental justice grants where money was given to activists to train other activist groups to come to DC and advocate for money so that they could go out and be activists. I said that if you want to define environmental justice as helping to remediate an issue in some community that needs to be remediated, then spend $1 on remediating the environmental issue. What President Trump has been so outspoken about as it relates to climate change and environmental justice is the way that it has been used to hoard precious tax dollars to be able to pay off well-connected people to give to unqualified recipients and with reduced agency oversight, or to hoard power. We saw in the Green New Deal. I'm from New York, where they ban gas hookups on new construction. They won't allow natural gas extraction. There's all sorts of pipelines that don't get approved. They set climate goals that they know they can't meet. We've seen it at the state level, we've seen it at the federal level, where this push on policy in the name of climate change, in the name of environmental justice, in the name of climate justice, like giving $50 million to Climate Justice Alliance. They say that climate justice runs through a free Palestine. All of this is believed to be a con job. There are people who are concerned about environmental issues. By the way, Liberals, moderates, conservatives, Republican, Democrat, Independent, all across this country, blue state, red state, purple state, people cherish the environment. They want to be good stewards of the environment. They care about conserving the land. They want clean water. This is a cause that really should be uniting Americans. The con job is when, in the name of environmental justice, you want to give money to some left-wing NGO. And here's the best test. If you want a pressure test, well, what are we doing about it, and is it fair? I don't advocate for taking money from a left-wing NGO and giving it to a right-wing NGO. This is about the American taxpayers. By the way, I haven't done it once. This is about precious U.S. taxpayers and a zero-tolerance policy for waste and abuse.
And last question, just to get back at this concern that many Americans have about how today's rollback is going to impact them, future generations, and the environment. You said that things have changed a lot in the past 16 years, but other researchers have found otherwise. For example, the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, they did an independent review and found that research from 2009 is still accurate, and that these greenhouse gases cause harm to public health, and that is beyond scientific dispute. Do you have new research to show otherwise?
So would the National Academy of Science state that your question was admitting carbon dioxide that was a harm to the environment? Was your question endangering public health and welfare? If you want to talk about the scale of someone getting inside of their vehicle and driving to work or getting to school, a vehicle that costs a lot more, by the way, than people are able to afford, do you believe that is endangering public health and welfare? The person who gets in the car, or are you asking your question?
I'm talking about the emissions from the automobiles.
Of course.
Do you have data that shows that?
Absolutely,
it
and it's in our final decision. We heavily researched it. We reviewed public comments. We responded to public comments. And I would encourage you and your listeners, everyone, to be able to read the findings that we put out. We received the public comments, and people and groups, they're out there entitled to their own opinion. And if you want to believe that the most pessimistic predictions that were made in 2009 about where the climate was going to be today in 2026, if you believe that the most pessimistic projections that relied upon them is actually the fact today, more power to you. You're entitled to your own set of facts, apparently. But unfortunately for us, what we have the task of doing is seeing everyone's public comments, responding, doing the research, following through on the models, being transparent and putting it in the final report, encouraging people to read it. How does it help Americans, the decision that we make? We are following the rule of law. We're following Supreme Court precedent. We're taking the best reading of the law. We're making vehicles more affordable, $2,400 for people who want to go get a new vehicle, and with a very high level of confidence. We know that we're not going to be setting back engines 20 years. It's not going to happen. We've been talking to manufacturers the whole time. What I do know, as I've been traveling around, because I went to all 50 states last year, and I've been to Toyota, Stellantis, Ford plants. I've spoken to other manufacturers about the impacts. I know about the different makes and models where they're going to get rid of the annoying start-stop feature. I know about the positive benefit of on compliance and monitoring when they get that relief, whether it's the 2010, 2012 emission standards or 2027 and beyond. We know how this is going to end up impacting these manufacturers, and it's in a way that leads to more investment, more jobs, more affordable vehicles. And fortunately, at this moment in 2026, these manufacturers aren't looking to go way back with that technology that's advanced so much, and we should be proud of it. And we shouldn't force ourselves in the name of a left-wing ideology to get trapped in the past and believe things that aren't true.